Well, welcome. I'm Tim Fortescue, an IFS practitioner. You can find more about me on my website, faithfullygrowing.com. But just wanted to chime in and give a little insight into IFS and to guide us in a parts check-in and meditation. Before I do that, I encourage you, first of all, if you're getting help from the content here and you're finding it useful, if you could just click that thank you button at the bottom, I believe is what YouTube calls it, and it gives you the opportunity to make a donation, and it just keeps access to this YouTube channel and keeps IFS accessible to all. Additionally, if a tax deductible donation is something that would be helpful for you, you can make a tax deductible donation on my website, faithfulgrowing.com, and just click the donate tab. And additionally, if you have questions as we go throughout our time today, if you're joining live, type them in the chat and I'll spend some time with your questions at the end. And if you're watching a recording, know too that I encourage you to put your questions in the chat regardless, and I will address those next week. I try to do this each week on Tuesdays at the same time, which is 9 a.m. Central here in the US, which is US Chicago time. And so one more promo is this Friday, I'm hosting a workshop on incorporating the Wheel of Life through a parts working perspective to find more balance into our life. The Wheel of Life is a tool that can help you see how balanced your life is in areas of health and family and relationships and whatnot. And so you can sign up for that on my website, and it's offered for a donation of any amount to my nonprofit to keep IFS accessible to all. And there are 10 slots available. Just over half of those have filled, but there are about 4 more spots available. And so if you'd like to join that workshop, you can reserve your spot on my website, faithfullygrowing.com. Well, let's jump into our content for just a bit. And today, just going to talk a little bit about recognizing patterns in our lives and the parts that come up during those patterns. And patterns in life, they can be hard to notice at first. I know you've probably heard me talk about my workaholic part, who can really come up every Friday when it's time to take some time off of work. That workaholic can come up, and I noticed that that's a pattern in my life. And then the parts that want rest show up on Friday and just want to be able to take a couple days off from work and do more fun things show up. And we may repeatedly find ourselves in similar situations or emotions, but can't pinpoint why. And in my case, with this workaholic or taskmaster part, constantly wanting to push for productivity. And I found out when I paused and was able to be with that part that despite being productive, I was physically burning out. And my family noticed that first. And that taskmaster didn't even know the effect that it was having on other parts of me and my system, as well as other relationships in my life. And as I recognized that and showed some compassion to that taskmaster, he was happy that he could soften back and take a break, didn't have to work so hard. And so just being aware of patterns and the parts that show up in those patterns in our life can be key. And so as we go throughout our time of reflection today, maybe helpful to ask, what are the recurring patterns that are showing up in your life? And then once we recognize the patterns, we're able to explore which which parts show up. And using internal family systems, or IFS, gives us the opportunity to get curious about the motivations of those parts, like my workaholic and taskmaster. And it also helps us just to pause and realize that everyone has parts. And you may have those people pleasers or worriers protecting us in different ways that show up in those patterns. And so another question to ask, which parts are responsible, or which parts show up in the patterns in your life, and what are they protecting you from? What's their job? What's their role? And they're doing the best that they can. And then once we identify these patterns, the key is to work with them, not against them. Seek to understand, to have some compassion, or to recognize those parts that may be annoyed at the taskmaster, in my case, that want a break and they can't have it. And so be aware that that's another part that shows up in that patterns. And forcing change doesn't work. Moving too quickly doesn't work. And I found that even in my life and in my work with clients this week. But we have to approach those parts with compassion. And while our parts never disappear, we can learn to recognize and work with them in healthier ways and let them know they're not alone. There's an inner team here. And that we're not today that little one, that exile that they may be protecting. And so ask yourself the question as we go throughout today, how can you work with your parts to understand and maybe change the patterns? And that doesn't mean that we're trying to push our parts away or put them out of a job, but there may be different ways, better ways, to where they have a job that they really want and appreciate more. And so patterns and parts behind them, they don't define us. They're here to help in their own way. And being curious and compassionate with our parts can lead to real, lasting change, growth, and confidence and peace in our lives. And so this week and during the reflection, maybe we could all take the challenge to reflect on the patterns in our lives and the parts that show up, and how can we approach them with compassion. And let's spend 5 minutes or so to see if we can put that into practice right now. Just take a bit and pause. And focus on your internal world. And if you can, pick one pattern, like my Friday afternoon pattern where the taskmaster and workaholic and parts that want a break show up. See if you can find just identify a pattern that naturally arises in your own life. Which parts show up for you? Just welcome them in. No agenda, no pressure here. Just want to hold space for a bit. And see if there's one part, like my taskmaster, that is prominent, that shows up. And see if you can give that part some attention. That's one option. Another option is I realize that my taskmaster has a lot of voice, and there are other parts that want more rest, or maybe are frustrated that the taskmaster gets so much voice. And maybe you can see if the taskmaster or your dominant part could soften back and see if it could give voice to another part that may not feel as seen and heard. And whether it's the taskmaster or the dominant part or the part that's reacting, thank them for softening back if they're able to, and let them know that they can still have a voice in the future. But for now, we can get more clarity generally if we focus on one part. Then turn your attention to the part that you're focusing on. And check in and see where you're noticing it, in or around your body. Maybe it's a sensation in the head or the chest or the belly. Maybe it's a visual of noticing the part in one corner of the room that you're in. How do you know this part is present? And check in and see how you're feeling toward this part. And see if you could extend it just a drop of compassion. Or maybe it's a lot more. And if you can't extend just a drop, it's likely another part that's coming in. Just see if that part could soften back and give some space. Remind it that it can have a voice at another time too. And if it's able to soften back, thank that part for giving space, and turn your attention back to the part that you're focusing on right now. And see if you can extend it just a bit of compassion or curiosity now. And how is this part able to receive that? How's it doing? Just let it know you're here. See if it has questions for you, things to share. Then just throw out one question before we spend some time with this part, and then we'll wrap up. But why do you show up in this pattern? How is that for you? And what do you need from me? And just spend a moment with this part that shows up in this pattern in your life. Just see if there's anything else before we wrap up. We'll spend another minute or so with this part. Just see what else may be helpful to let it know who you are today. Often our parts think we're younger. Let them know they're not alone. They've got you, even though they may not trust you fully right now. See if you could keep showing up and get to know them more and let them get to know you. They're doing the best they can. They're doing the best they can in this pattern that keeps showing up. And then when it feels right, just think this part that you're focusing on now for as much or as little as it's shared. And let it know that you're not going to forget about it if that feels right, and that you'd like to spend more time with it if it would like that. Then turn to the part that may have softened back. Maybe it's your taskmaster, workaholic, dominant part that shows up in a pattern for you, just like my taskmaster shows up on Friday afternoons when parts want to take a break. Whichever part that softened back, thank it again for its courage in doing that. Let it know that you can spend some time with it in the future too. That it's not alone. It's got you. It's got a world bigger than you. And it's got an inner team. And just think any other parts that may have witnessed you engaging with the part that you focused on today, and thank them for being able to witness. And then when it feels right for now, you can bring your attention back to the present moment. You can open your eyes if they were closed. You can continue about life. But thanks so much for your courage for joining me for this meditation. Join me on Friday, October 4th, for a Donate What You Can workshop on using the Wheel of Life, which is a tool to help us see how balanced we are in areas of relationships and work and recreation and several other things. And we're going to look at that through an IFS lens and the parts that show up there, and to see if we can get more balance and clarity. And so that is on Friday at 10 o'clock Central, which is US Chicago time, on October 4th. And you can reserve a spot at faithfullygrowing.com. There are about 4 spots left. And so would love to meet you on Friday, and you can just donate what you can. But if you have questions too, you can always send me an email to tim@faithfullygrowing.com. As well as if you're watching a recording, I track with the chat here. And so if you have questions, I'll bring them up next week. Try to do this each week on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Central US Chicago time here in the US. But thanks so much for your courage and joining. Thanks so much. Is that Latai? Thanks so much for the hand, and so good. So glad that you're here. Good to see familiar faces. And join me next week. If you can, send me an email, tim@faithfullygrowing.com, if I can help with anything in between. But so grateful for this community and what we're developing here. And have a great week. And let's be gentle with ourselves, and take care.